Hello, everybody. Welcome to ECO-595 Business Research Methods. Now, today we're going to go over Chapter 6, Problem Definition, the foundation of the business research. Now, this is a very important chapter that will pretty much shape what research you're going to conduct. Okay? All right, let's first start with an example. And throughout the lecture, we will revisit this example. So this is about Dylan Trucking. Dylan Trucking has a recruitment problem, okay? So Dylan is the owner of the company, and he noticed recently that their recruiting cost has been skyrocketing, right? So his question is, why are our recruiting costs so high? Okay, and then he hired a researcher. Let's see, his name is James. Let's just say the researcher's name is James. So he mentioned to James that the cost for driver selection and recruitment have not gone up. Okay, it's the recruiting cost going up, but the selection process and recruitment cost is the typical one. It's quite similar to other companies. Okay, now the other change he noticed is that the company has to do so many orientation and hiring sessions. Apparently, they're hiring a lot of workers, a lot of drivers now. So the researcher James is hired to conduct some research to help solve the problem, okay? And during the conversation between Dylan and James, James have learned the symptoms about the issue right now. He knows that recruiting cost is high, many orientation and hiring sessions, cost for driver selection, recruitment has been staying the same, okay? So before James starts working on the research, he needs to put together a proposal to lay out the research plan and discuss with the owner of the company, Dylan, before he really invests into the research. Okay, so after all, there needs to be some form of contract between Dylan, the client, and James, the researcher. They should have some kind of agreement upon what will be researched, what product or what results they would expect, how much this research would cost, and how long it will take for the research to conduct such research. Okay. All right. Now, when James tries to come up with the research plan, he actually needs to do more planning, or shall we say more information gathering, before he sit down and write the proposal. So good decisions start with a good problem definition. One of the most important steps is to define the problem, okay? Now, based on what is described so far, it seems like, at least to Dylan, the owner, the problem is the recruitment cost, okay? Usually the manager or the owner, for this case, might be too focused on the symptoms. To him, his view most likely will be, well, I want a researcher to help us to reduce the recruiting cost. Okay, maybe cut some orientation sessions, maybe cut some selection procedures, things like that. So he might be more focusing on how do I deal with the issue I view, or how do I deal with the symptom I see. Okay. However, for the researcher, he needs to think more broadly. He needs to gather more information, because the way he defined the problem will eventually shape or kind of determine what decision he will be able to come up with, or what conclusion or solution he will be able to come up with. Okay, so for James, he needs to translate business decision situation into specific research objectives. Okay, now after all, the research serves management. So between the management and the researcher, there should be several conversations trying to really shape up the real problem and the real decision that the management wants. Okay, there are situations where the management may want A, and for the researcher, he sees the problem more like a B. And for that situation, there should be conversation between the researcher and the management and the researcher needs to clearly explain why the symptoms the management have seen are not the real cause of the problem. Okay. So here I have a couple of examples to show you one management may be misled by what they've seen, and they may also mislead the research based on their own perceptions. Okay, and here I have 3 examples. As you can see, 2 of them are really big companies, Coca-Cola and Ford. Okay, so for the Coca-Cola case, it's actually a very it's a classical one, maybe I could put it that way. It's about a new Coke. So at some point, okay, the management of Coca-Cola decides that they want to replace that old Coke with new Coke, claiming that new Coke has better taste. Okay. Now, their view is consumers would prefer the new Coke because it tastes better. Okay, so they actually take themselves as the competitor and say, let's try to improve our product, which in a sense is right because you always want to improve the quality of your product. However, management failed to realize that one of their competitors, the biggest one, is actually Pepsi, right? And actually there is research kind of suggesting that people think Pepsi tastes better than Coke. I do have a comment there. I don't know about you, but for me, my personal preference is Coke somehow. I'm sure there are people who prefer Pepsi. Speak of that, whenever I talk about the example, I can't think of a little story that my husband told me the other day. So when he was in China, one day he went to a restaurant with his friends. They sat down, so the waitress came and asked, "Sir, what do you want for drinking?" So my husband answered, "I want." So my husband asked, "What do you have?" The waitress basically asked, "Coke or Pepsi?" So my husband said, "I want Coke." And then the waitress says, "We don't have Coke." So he was totally shocked. And then he replied, "Well, if you don't have Coke, why are you asking in the first place?" So my guess is, I was reflecting on that little story. My thinking is that the waitress is probably just follow some routine work and didn't think at all. So whenever someone sit down at the table, she just go there and ask whatever he asks all the time. Anyway, so basically, as you can see, even as consumers, we put Pepsi and Coke as the biggest competitors. Now, what's misleading in this situation is Coke wants to know about the taste. So they decide to conduct blind taste test. Blind taste test fits the best when you really want to study the taste of something. However, in Coke situation, it's a little special because think about it. If you like Coke, okay, when you drink Coke, is it purely the taste, or it also is a combination of taste, feeling, brand, etc. Right? I'm sure it's probably a combination of little things all putting together that you prefer Coke to Pepsi. Okay. So actually in this case, the management didn't view their research objective or didn't view their decision making correctly, such that they misled the research. And it turns out, well, okay, they did conduct the research. They conducted blind taste test, and people drinking several cup of drinks, trying to tell which one tastes the best, which one tastes the second, etc. The research did reveal that people think new Coke tastes better than Coke. Okay? Well, if the management based their decision on this result, they will say, all right, let's replace our old Coke with this new Coke because it tastes better. But they forget that drinking Coke is also something psychological, right? You take away the old Coke, you lose your customers because they are loyal to the brand, they're loyal to the old Coke, including the taste, the image, the brand, and the psychological feeling of drinking Coke. Okay? So that's one situation where the focus is really, are you trying to test taste or you are trying to test brand? Okay? The other example is Ford Axle. That's one model Ford produced for a while. It turns out that it's a failure. Now, actually, after this failure, of course, there are tons of studies looking at this case, trying to figure out what caused the problem, right? Well, actually, prior research did reveal a few things that could lead to the failure, such as styling, poor workmanship, failure to understand consumer. There was one thing that the research didn't answer, that is the name. The name is not tested. As you can imagine, well, okay. First of all, Axel is the name of Henry Ford's son. Actually, I think I learned from someone Axel is also his middle name, and he named his son using his middle name. So apparently, they picked Axel, the brand, for a reason. And I guess at that time, you can say, well, I want to, use my son's name for something. You can do that. And apparently the management didn't even consider anything else. They didn't think this is an option. So they didn't set up research to test the name. Okay. Well, but if you think back, right, any name should be tested. How many times are we picking something based on the name, right? We want some attractive name, right? When we, for example, if we have newborns, we have to pick name. And I don't know about you, but picking name to me is always a headache. In particular, as a foreigner, I need to pick names to accompany many, many things. First of all, I want the name to be not very unique, such that people cannot even pronounce. Second, I need to pick a name, the English name that is easy to pronounce for my parents and the in-laws, right? They are Chinese. They don't know how to pronounce English words. So I need to pick something at least for them, easy for them, right? So name is something that will definitely affect people's perception on the product. Same as design, right? Package design, same thing. And therefore, this is another situation where actually the management didn't set the research goal correctly or didn't set the decision-making correctly, then consequently the research didn't follow correctly. The last thing is a smokeless cigarette, right? So for this case, the situation is when smokeless cigarettes came out, right? People think this would be a fantastic idea, but it failed actually. Well, I know you might say, oh, look, smokeless cigarettes, or sometimes we'll call it e-cigarette, is still selling online and in stores. That is true, but actually it is not selling as well as it was expected. At the very beginning, when this e-cigarette came out, people think this is a fantastic idea. It would be successful because it will allow smokers to smoke virtually everywhere, right? So, of course, the management want to conduct research to find out what would be consumers' reaction. Well, when you talk about consumers' reaction, what they did, the research they kind of asked for is to find out how smokers and non-smokers react to e-cigarettes. Okay, of course, I'm a non-smoker. I don't smoke. My husband does. So as a non-consumer smoker, of course, think this is a fantastic idea because it will allow me to avoid the harm from the smoke, right? The harm from his smoking. Now for smokers, actually, if you think about it, it kind of depends. If the smoker is living with a non-smoker, right? If he's quite much confined, then definitely he will say, look, yes, I prefer e-cigarette to the actual cigarettes because I can smoke inside, right? However, what they fail to compare is one cigarette and e-cigarettes are available for choose what do smokers prefer, right? So if you don't smoke, go ask someone you know well who smokes, right? And they will tell you smoking is not just about the nicotine in the smoke, in the cigarettes, right? It's more than that. It's the feeling, it's the view of the smoke going up in the air. It's the feeling of having something in your hand. I often see my husband having a cigarette in his hand, he just holding it. That's already sufficient for him. He just let the cigarette to burn, and he will take one smoke for a long time. And most of the time, the cigarette is just burned by itself, right? So this is another situation where the management may view the situation differently from what was actually needed, and this will mislead the research. If you tell the researcher you hire, look, I want to know how smokers and non-smokers react to e-cigarettes, right? Then you will get what you asked for. But the management didn't put the position correctly. They didn't view the situation as they need to find out for smokers, do they prefer cigarettes or e-cigarettes? Okay. So what we learn from these examples are during this research plan process, there must be, as I mentioned, conversations between management and researcher, and sometimes researcher needs to be to come up with a different point of view from the management, and they need to communicate to clear out any ambiguity, to clear out any concerns or any misunderstanding or any disagreement. Okay. All right. So here are three directions that a research can go, and here are also three directions that one can define a research problem. I believe we've talked about this a little bit before, and where I said there are two basic directions. One is the business is facing an issue. The other is the business is facing opportunity. Actually, once we go through these three situations, I think, in my opinion, we can still kind of classify them into two big categories. But let's take a look. The first situation is business performance is worse than expected business performance, right? Now, typically, the management will have a goal or set a bar for sales, profit, etc., okay, or margins. And whenever the actual performance is below the targets, that's when the business has a problem, and that's when business research is needed to find out the cause of such underperformance and also find out solutions for such underperformance, right? That's when the business is facing real problem, real issues. Now, the second one is actual business performance is less than possible business performance. So actually, this is the situation where the management or a company is seeking new opportunities, right? For example, there are a lot of American companies now going abroad. I think it's, about 20 years ago, there was no McDonald's or KFC or Subway or any fast food restaurant in China, right? We even don't know what a burger would be, right? Nowadays, if you go to China, as American, you don't need to worry about where you're going to eat. Well, at least if you are okay with fast food. I know a lot of people prefer some healthy or a formal restaurant to dine in. But if you go to China, if you're okay with fast food restaurant, just no worry, you find it almost everywhere, right? So that is the situation where the actual business could be expanded because of the westernized people in Asia. You could seek new opportunities. The third one is expected business performance is greater than possible business performance. Okay, this is, to me, is also like an issue because this is a situation where management are just too ambitious. They set up an unrealistic goal. Okay, they thought they could achieve this high, but actually, if research is conducted, it may reveal that that goal is not possible at all. So this is also a situation where if you have a new product and you have really high expectation on it, it turns out it didn't work well. Now, if you conduct research to see what's going on, research may reveal that, look, your goal in the first place is too high to achieve. Okay, so I would rather describe this as another issue for the company. All right. So now when we define problems, okay, we would also need to be careful with what we ask. Sometimes, if we ask the wrong question or if we pick the wrong type of question, we could also get poor research results, and this may also lead to the failure of the new product of the campaign or the, I guess, the change or the solution. So here's one example that shows you poor questions can result in poor research in Japan. It's about a French yogurt manufacturer. They noticed that Japanese were more westernized. Well, I guess this is not current. It must be many years ago because I can even notice that China are much more westernized these days. Okay, so they decide to launch campaign to advertise their yogurt, introduce their yogurt, and they actually expect really high sales. They did conduct research. They did research into people in Japan, their preference about yogurt, etc. Now, two problems with the research they conducted, though. They asked the wrong question. The first one is that, well, this is related to the culture of Japan. Their culture is people tend to be very polite. They always avoid to hurt other people's feeling. They are very polite, very polite. Okay. I have a friend. She lives in Japan. She said she went to the dentist for a procedure. Of course, well, if you think about it, sometimes you go to the dentist for a procedure. It's not comfortable, and it may hurt just a little bit, right? It depends. So she went there, and the dentist was performing the procedure on her. The dentist just keep apologizing because the procedure makes her uncomfortable. Keep apologizing. She said it's almost like if you hear the apologies, you would think, wow, this must be very miserable. But that's their nature. They're just very polite, very considerate. So back to the research. For this research from the French manufacturer, yogurt factory, what they did is they simply used yes or no question to ask about consumers' preference about yogurt. Okay? Now, look, Japanese are very polite. So they were too polite to say no. If you ask them, would you buy this product? Do you prefer it? Do you think it's a popular one? Do you like it? Things like that. If you just ask that, their answer will be a yes, yes, yes. This is because they don't want to hurt other people's feelings. All right? This is good and bad because now with all these yes answers, right, it will not turn into real sales because they're just being polite. What they could do is they could actually design other type of questions, list options for them to choose, right? They could ask open-ended questions, ask the respondents to respond in words. So this will, to a certain extent, avoid such situations. And the other issue is they created the ads featuring a spoon as an eating utensil. Okay? Now, again, just because Japanese are too polite, they didn't point that out. So let's say this. You look at this picture right now. It's picturing a guy using chopsticks to eat, right? You would probably feel this is quite natural because this guy apparently looks like an Asian. My guess is he's a Japanese. He's using chopsticks. That goes together naturally. Now, imagine this guy using a spoon, right? And he's sitting there eating what is called, oh gosh, can't remember. I eat it all the time. Why couldn't I remember? Sushi, sorry. Eating sushi using a spoon. What do you think? Isn't that very weird, right? So a person might feel not offended, but a little bit uncomfortable with that image and thus will not purchase the product, but the person may be too polite to point it out. So that's another problem with the research. And this apparently leads to the wrong conclusion saying that, yes, the Japanese market is ready for the product, will have really overwhelming sales, but it turns out not. Okay. So let's see. How can we define the problem? I would say to the best as we can. Okay. There are several steps in the process, and I changed the process just a little bit because it feels more natural going that way. The first one will be understand the situation. You want to identify the key symptoms. Recall our trucking company, right? The symptoms were high recruiting cost, same selection cost, and same training cost. A lot of training sessions. These are the symptoms, okay? The next step is for the researchers to identify the problem from the symptoms, okay? Now, sometimes the symptoms is superficial. It may not be the real problem that one needs to address. Actually, for the trucking company, okay, the symptoms may suggest the problem is a recruiting problem. It's a recruitment problem. But turns out it's not. Okay, it's not. So we'll see in a minute why is that the case. So this is also like you go to see the doctor, you describe your own symptoms. You say, I have a headache, right? I have running nose, I have sore throat, etc. You describe the symptom, and the doctor will conduct several procedures to determine what's going on with you, right? So the cause of the problem may not be just the symptoms, okay? Now in Chinese, we have a saying, I guess it's not, there's no accurate translation, but we have the saying kind of like when a person has a headache, you just cure the headache. When the person has a pain in the foot, you just cure the foot. But sometimes the cause of the pain may not be just within the head or within the foot. So you need to examine overall issue, right? Same here. You identify, you see the symptoms, you really want to connect the symptoms to a certain extent and identify the real problem. We'll talk about this more with a few examples. The third step is to write managerial decision statements. This is very important because during the conversation between the researcher and the management, okay, both may think they understand each other. Okay, the management definitely has something in mind and saying, this is the decision I want to make. Okay, and now for the researcher based on what's described by the management will also have some idea about what decision the management needs. So the researcher actually needs to gather, as I mentioned here, gather symptoms, look into the issue, really define what is the managerial decision that research can achieve. Okay, then once the researcher writes managerial decision statements in the research prospectus and submit it to the management can examine it and make sure this is really what I want. But for the researcher's job, there's an actual layer to that. But for the research job, he also needs to do his best to make sure this managerial decision will be the one that can deal with the problem the company is facing. Okay. So, and then once you know what managerial decision the management is trying to make, you will be able to design the research objective. Now, basically, that research objective really corresponds to the decision statement, right? Your objective is just try to find out how the management decisions can be made, or what can be made, okay, etc. So number 6, the next step is from the textbook it says determine the unit of analysis. For me, I would say now, since step 4 and 5 are kind of like you can perform these 2 steps anytime. So I'll rather put number 6 there, because once you know what you want to do or what you need to answer, you can design the research questions and or research hypotheses. Now the textbook states as if you could just come up with research questions. Sometimes you are not able to come up with research hypotheses. I kind of hold a different opinion, because at least for us, I believe this is new for most of you in terms of writing the research prospectus, conducting business research. So I would suggest that research hypotheses are mandatory. Okay. Now the reason being, the research hypothesis definitely will define what kind of conclusion, what kind of managerial decision you will be able to come up after conducting the research. So research hypothesis. Now, typically, if you have a research question, you would, in your mind, have a potential answer, and you just twist that potential answer as a research hypothesis, set it up as a statement that needs to be tested, that needs to be verified. Now, typically, for each research question, there should be at least several hypotheses, at least one, and sometimes several. Okay. For example, you could say what features a new product could. Okay, sorry. What features we could add to a new product to attract more customers? That could be a research question, right? Now, for the research hypothesis, right? You would think, oh, there are several features we could consider. Then when you come up with the research hypothesis, it's actually clearer if you set up each hypothesis for each feature. Say, for example, you could say, we should add a sensor to a new product. Okay, a sensor added to the product will attract more customers, or customer may find the product with the sensor to be more useful, right? So if that's the case, the hypothesis will be adding a sensor to the product will attract more customers or will have increased the sales of the product. Okay, so you want to list each feature you consider in a separate hypothesis. But at least for each research question, you are looking for an answer, right? If you have an answer in mind, potential answer in mind, then you need to twist that as a hypothesis to test it. Now, speak of that. If you have a research question and you've already got an answer and you are so sure it is true, if that's the case, look, then that's not a situation where you need business research. Okay, if as a researcher or as the management, you know if you do A, B will definitely happen, then there's no need for research. Okay, you just go ahead and do it. If you have a research question and you have a potential answer, but you don't know whether this answer is true or not, or if you don't know whether this change will help the business or not, this is exactly where you need business research. This is exactly where you need to use empirical work to test the potential solution you have in mind, to test the potential answer you have in mind. Okay? So actually step 6 is, or step 4, however you number it. Step 4, this step is very important. It's very important. And this is also the part that I will focus when reading your research prospectus. Now, the next step is to determine the unit of analysis. Basically, this could have been done once you get this research objective, okay? Because the unit of analysis basically just means who you want to gather data from. If you are looking at consumer production, then you definitely want to survey consumers. But if this is a local product, it's a local company, then the unit of analysis will be the consumers within this region, okay? Now, if it's a household product, okay, refrigerator, it's more of a household product, you will define the unit as analysis as household. If you are serving business or business units or different departments in the business, then that's the unit of your analysis. Once you know the research objectives, basically you will all be able to tell the unit of analysis. And this will help the researcher to design data collection, to design the sample, etc. And the last step is to determine the relevant variables, okay? Now, relevant variables depend on the research objective and the research question. Now, if you think about it, say for example, let's see what I can come up with. The credit issues, okay? Now think about it. One, you apply for a credit card, right? The credit card company will pull up your credit report to determine whether they will give you approve the credit or not, right? Then there, if you think about it, the research question for the credit card issuer is to determine whether you as an applicant is worthwhile or not, right? And how could he determine that? First of all, that's a variable already. That is how to determine whether an applicant is worthwhile or not. Okay. Now, apparently, there are tons of issues can affect this applicant's credit, right? So that's why we have the credit score. If you think about it, credit score is actually I probably can't define it rigorously, but it's a synthesized score of reflecting almost every aspect of someone's credit. It starts from your debt, your wealth, and your past history. It kind of take into consideration a lot of things, right? The credit score, right? So in that case, okay, actually, we would think what affects an applicant's credit, okay? So all of these factors will be defined as relative variable as well. So for the case I was mentioning, you applying for a credit card, the variable that we are really interested is whether you are worthwhile or not. Okay, it's a yes or no answer, or whether your credit is good or not. Okay, well, yes, the company will pull out the credit score, but let's look behind the credit score. What are involved in credit score, right? These all other factors will be also the relative variables. They could include how many credit cards you have so far, right? Have you ever been delinquent? Have you ever filed bankruptcy? What is your annual income? For all of these questions, think about it. When you apply for the credit score, right? You answer so many questions. All these questions, why do they ask? Right? That's because they know your answer to these questions can affect your credit. Okay, so all of these reflect the relative variable. Okay. So by the last step, once you have the research objective, determine whether you are worthwhile or not as a credit card applicant, and once you know the research question or research hypothesis, that is, find out what factors affect a person's credit, after define step 3 and step 6, you will be able to come up with a relative variable. Okay, so that's the whole procedure of define the problem. Actually, if you think about it, from step 1 to the very last step, this is the procedure you're going to follow in your research prospectus. So research prospectus is really laying out the thinking process you have before conducting the research plan. Okay, but it's certainly more than that. Let me save it for later. Right? And what we want to do right now is to go over the details. Okay. The first step, of course, is understand the business decision. That is, we want to analyze the situation. We want to get a background information. Okay? Now, to get a background information is not just about talking with the management. You are called in by the management to inform you what's going on, why you are hired, or why you are asked to conduct the research. Okay? But once you talk with management, you need to go out and get more information. As I mentioned, the management has their own view. You should be more neutral. You should gather comprehensive information from every aspect. You should, well, if this is something involves technology, different departments, you should go out and talk to different people out there, not just the management themselves. Okay. So therefore, for the interview process, you're gonna interview all relevant parties. Okay. And once you get the information, you need to develop many alternative problem statements. And this is because you don't want to confine yourself to a very narrow point and lose the view of the whole forest. Okay, You want to give yourself as many options as possible. In particular, you could further refine the problem statement through the conversation with management. Typically, for a research plan or research prospectus, it's not one shot. It's not that you write it, you submit it, you start working on the research. It doesn't go like that. It actually goes several rounds. You write down the plan, you write down what you think needs to be solved, send to the management, and usually the management come back with something in their mind. So it's more like I wouldn't say negotiation, but it's more like a discussion process. And eventually, the management and you will altogether determine what's to be done for the research. Okay, and for that reason, you want to develop many alternative problem statements and refine it until you've got the best one. And once you find the problem, you want to think about all possible solutions. Don't just come up with one solution. Okay, what if you come up with one solution and you gather data, you collect data, you analyze data, but it turns out the data doesn't support your solution, right? You wasted money and time. So don't come up with one per solution only. Well, I need to put a note on it. If there's a situation that there's no other solution absolutely, you just have one, and you just need to know whether this one would work or not. Well, that's the exception, okay? I have to admit there are such situations. However, in general, there should be several options, and you need to consider all of them. Make a list of ideas, write down what you have, be open-minded. As I mentioned, don't just focus on one point exclusively. Now, with all these said, for your research prospectus, most likely you will not do this. Why? Because you're not actually hired. You cannot talk to all relevant parties. Okay? You don't have many problem statements because once you say, oh, this is my topic, then based on what I've seen so far, most likely it will be issue or an opportunity. So it's already relatively defined. The problem is already relatively defined well for you. So probably you will not conduct this process. Now, what do you need to do for this step? I want you to do a lot of research. Well, this research is not the business research we're talking about. I want you to do a lot of research on the internet to find out relative information about the company's issue. Okay? Read the news report, read their financial report, read whatever you can read or whatever you can find. Okay? Get to know the problem better so that you can come up with quite a lot of possible solutions. Okay? So in this step, your task is not to talk to relevant parties, but talk to the internet. Go search for useful information. Okay? Now, once you gather the background information, I want to emphasize, please do not spend lengthy describing the background of the issue. You do not need to talk about the little details, every aspect of it. You do not want to talk about the issue with the whole industry. You do not want to talk about, oh, this company was established in 1956 by this person, has been doing great, blah, blah, blah. That's something you don't need to mention at all. Look, this is the contract between you and the management. The management do not need you to compliment them. Okay, they want you to solve the issue. So in the background, in your research prospectus, talk to the issue directly, describe it, and mention the consequence. Okay, mention the consequence. All right, so here's kind of an example to show you how you can probe the interviewer for what's going on. But let's look at this example. The first situation, what we're trying to do is we're going to look at the first two examples and come up with likely problems, decision statement, oops. Yeah. And then we want to define research objectives, design research questions, and come up with research hypotheses. Okay. So it's more like a practice for you to try to go through the thinking process. Let's take a look at the first one. It says 22-year-old neighborhood swimming association seeks research help. Okay, the symptom of, imagine this, right? So the manager of this swimming association calls you in and say, well, we need your help. So the manager says, well, we face decline in membership for 6 years. Okay, we notice there's a new water park and there's increased attendance. We're jealous about that, right? And we also notice even for our members, they use our facility less frequently. So we want to help, right? Okay. By the way, whatever I mentioned as the following that's not the standard answer. There can be several answers to it. So I'm just well, I will tell you that I'm gonna follow in the textbook, but these are just examples. Okay. So what could be the likely problem? Now we have a quite apparent comparison here. There is this 22-year-old swimming association versus new water park. Okay, that's big difference. And new water park is not popular. So apparently, right? The problem is, well, the swimming association, the facilities must be old. It's already 22-year-old. If they didn't upgrade it, if they didn't do any renovation, right, it might be outdated. So that could be the likely problem that drive members away, right? And the other problem is about the pool. I actually had that experience. Honestly, I don't know how to swim. I'm not sure whether I want to learn it or not. But I do have 2 young children. I want them to learn how to swim. So I took them to the swimming lessons. Now, if this is a pool, right? The problem is they go to learn their swimming lessons. I'm gonna just stay there, right? Well, what if I want to play water myself? Okay. Now, water park, on the other hand, give me some choices. My children could learn. Well, after I think about it, I have 2-year-old and 5-year-old. Neither of them know how to swim. So at the very beginning, they don't need this formal training. Okay. So that's the presumption. That's what I'm facing. All of us, the 3 of us, none of us know how to swim. And the 2 of my young children are learning how to swim. So they don't need this formal training. They don't need this pool to learn how to swim. They can learn pretty much anywhere as long as there's water, right? And for me, if it is water park, they can learn. At the same time, I can enjoy some leisure time myself, right? And also for my 2 young children, unfortunately, they are not big fans of water. How do I force them to learn? So to them, they would rather have fun in the water park. So if you think about it, actually, there's another comparison that is between the swimming pool and the water park. Probably young family or family with younger children will prefer water park. That's another issue, right? Okay, so what is the decision statement? Apparently, the management or the director definitely wants to know how to attract more customers, right? How to change or create a more favorable attitude towards the pool, how to regenerate their market, how to make the association more popular again. Okay, that's the decision statement. We'll continue to the next step in a minute, but since what's on this page, let's look at the second example. This is about home-sized computer with wireless internet access. The manufacturers believe that B2B sales are too low for this situation. Okay. Let's see. Sorry, I'm. Okay. So the symptoms include distributors complain prices are too high. Business users still use larger computers for displaying information to consumers or smartphones for other purposes. Well, first of all, I need to point out, apparently this example is really outdated because palm-sized computer with wireless internet access, isn't that the iPad thing? Isn't that the service thing? It's now selling pretty well, right? So this is in the old days. I remember there was one point when the touchpad just emerged in the market. It's expensive, I have to say, and I'm not a very, I guess I'm quite I'm quite okay with just current technology. Whenever there's new stuff coming out, I'm not so anxious to get it. As long as I can satisfy my research requirement, I don't think it's necessary for me to get a new product. My husband, on the other hand, he's really, really into the renovation, and whenever there's a new product, he's really excited to get it. So when there's this iPad coming out, he's really interested, but I insist that it's costing too much. We don't need it. He ended up buying a, I guess, second-class touchpad. It's much cheaper, but it's very clumsy. It's not that nice, but he's still so excited playing with it all day long, right? Well, that's many years ago. And later on, once you get the real iPad, I eventually gave up. I was like, all right, let's get one. So once you get the real iPad, we have to say it's much better. It's such an improvement. So apparently this must be many years ago. Okay, let's just assume there's no iPad yet. There's no such thing. So don't imagine what's going on right now. The good thing is, look, since this happened before, we will know better right now what could be the potential problem, what could be the potential solution. So let's take a look. Two major symptoms. Prices are too high, right? Second, users are not using it. So apparently they don't find any use of it. Okay? This means the palm-sized computer is not useful. Okay? And at least it's not outweighing the cost of purchasing this. And the other thing is, I would say the transaction, right? The transition from computer to palm-sized computer, and the transition from palm-sized computer to smartphone. Okay, think about it. The transition between Android and ISO, right? The transition between PC and Mac. My husband recently made the transition from PC to Mac because our family is PC oriented, and the main reason is, again, me. Sounds like I'm so controlling the whole situation, but for a lot of my research purpose, using Mac will be quite clumsy, so I insist that we stay with PC. But my husband recently got a new job, and he needs to transition to Mac. It's quite a transition for him. He complains quite a lot, only to me apparently, saying that, the habit is so different, I can't find this, can't find that, right? So apparently there will be transition cost. And the likely problem for this is the transition cost might be too high. Okay? So what could be the decision statement? Well, apparently the manufacturer wants to know what can be done to improve the sales, to make the B2B sales high, to make the palm-sized computer useful again. Okay. So that's the decision statement. And the third one is for your review. I've already got the answer here. Because I'm not a big fan of drinking. Allow me to skip it, at least for right now. Okay. So I have to stop this session. I'll record the rest of the lecture in a different session. See you next time.